Dumbleton nestled deep in the Cotswolds, a village so hidden it seemed time had overlooked it. Mist clung to treetops and gravestones, shrouding the landscape in secrecy. Thatched roofs, stone walls, and a crumbling church tower marked this postcard. Hamlet, where every window watched but curtains stayed still. Hastings leaned forward as the motorcar rattled along the drive. "You'll like it here, Poirot," he said, glancing at his companion, who sat rigid in a pristine gray suit, silk handkerchief impeccably folded in his pocket. "I am reserving judgment," Poirot replied sharply. "Already I observe inconsistencies. Lady Wilton's invitation for peace and quiet clashes with the urgency in her letter." He produced a folded sheet from his coat, smoothing it on his knee. Hastings had read it once, but Poirot's eyes scoured it again, not for words, but for the slant of ink, the paper's edges, the stationery's weight, treating it like evidence in a trial. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive the imposition, but I must entreat you to come at once. You are perhaps the only man who will not dismiss what I fear is madness, or worse. I cannot say more. My husband will not hear of it, but something has gone terribly wrong at Wren Hollow." Below Lady Wilton's signature, a hasty postscript. "P.S. It only rained on one grave." An unusual remark, Hastings mused aloud. "Not merely unusual," Poirot corrected, "but deliberate a phrase masking a deeper truth. You English bury meaning beneath understatement, like bodies beneath stone." As the car climbed the hill, Wren Hollow emerged a manor of restrained grandeur, its walls choked with ivy, gardens sloping toward a distant chapel. The land was damp, quiet, but not peaceful. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Regard, Hastings. The path to the graveyard is muddied, but only in one direction. Someone has made frequent use of it." Hastings followed his gaze to the chapel, where a single stone cross stood out nor, its paler, with dark soil heaped unevenly at its base. Curiously, the earth just beyond it was dry, as if rain had skipped it entirely. A tall, gray-haired butler greeted them at the entrance, his face etched with long service and deeper worry. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he bowed. "Her ladyship awaits in the drawing room." Wren Hollow's interior was as expected. Heavy wood, oil portraits, the scent of old tobacco and older secrets. Yet the air felt brittle, as if a single word might crack it. Lady Wilton rose as they entered, tall, elegant, her auburn hair streaked with white that seemed too sudden for age. She clasped Poirot's hand firmly, but her eyes darted to the door, wary of listeners. "I apologize for my letter's dramatic tone," she said softly, "but I feared you wouldn't come otherwise." "Then we are here," Poirot replied gently. "Now, madame, let us lift the veil." "What is this madness you speak of?" She inhaled sharply. "It's my son's grave heralds. He died last autumn, a riding accident, or so we were told. But lately, strange things have happened, small, inexplicable things. Last week, it rained on only one grave. His. The rest of the yard was dry. Even the vicar said it was impossible." Poirot's brows drew together. "And what does Lord Wilton make of this?" Her face tightened. "He calls me hysterical, says the weather is whimsical, the servants superstitious. He forbids me to speak of it, but I know something is wrong with Harold's death." Before Hastings could reply, the door opened. A man in a dark navy blazer entered, square-jawed, straight-backed, his presence commanding the room. "Lord Wilton, clearly. So, the detective has arrived," he said, contempt thinly veiled, with a military observer in tow. "Good evening, my lord," Poirot said, with calm courtesy. "You are a man of reason, no doubt." Permit me to apply mine and see whether Lady Wilton's concern is madness or something more significant. Wilton eyed Poirot like a troublesome insect. You'll find no mystery here. My son's death was a tragedy, investigated thoroughly. No fault, no foul. We've grieved, or I have tried to move on. Yet it rained on only one grave, Poirot said softly. Wilton's jaw clenched. If you've come to chase ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, you've wasted your journey. With that, he left, the door clicking shut like a gavel. Silence fell, broken only by the clock's ticking. Poirot turned to Lady Wilton. May I see Harold's room? She nodded, eyes glistening. Yes, Petite hasn't been touched since the funeral, as Poole and Hastings followed the housekeeper. Up the stairs, the stillness of Wren Hollow began to speak. It spoke in the creaks beneath. Their feet the scent of disuse, the way a door handle turned reluctantly, as if protesting against the pastoral Wilton's room was bathed in late afternoon shadow. The desk lay a broken watch, stopped at 4:16. Beside it, a foxed letter, the corner. Torn Poole picked it up with gloved hands. Then Harold looked out the window. From there, one could see the grave, the one where it trained, and in that moment, Poirot's eyes sharpened it. There is no such thing as a grave that receives rain alone, he murmured, only Amen who ensures it appears that way. Chapter 2. The man who kept secrets in the chapel. It was nearing dusk when Poirot, having examined every corner of Harold Wilton's untouched room with methodical precision, turned away from the window overlooking the grave. The light outside had dimmed further, fading into that spectral gray where nothing casts shadow and nothing looks quiet. Hercule Poirot stepped carefully around the small collection of personal belongings, old riding crop, a photograph in a silver frame of Harold, beside a bay horse and a dog-eared volume of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. With several passes underlined, he paused at the book, running a gloved finger across the margin, then replaced it exactly as it had lain. Captain Hastings, he said, without looking up, what do you make of this stopped watch? Well, Hastings replied, arms crossed, thoughtfully. One might suppose it broke during the accident. It's not uncommon riders, fall watches, shatter. Just so, but this one did not shatter. It has no damage, it simply stopped, as Talzamion removed the pin at precisely 416 PO, tilted his head, or wound it down. Intentionally, you think someone tampered with it? Hastings asked. Poirot did not reply. Handsomely stared at the desk again, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. After a moment, he turned crisply. Come, mon ami, it is time we speak to the vicar. I believe is the only man in this village who keeps his doors open after sundown. Hastings followed, puzzled. The vicar? Why, Himbox, Hastings. When a woman of refinement writes in terror that it trained on only one grave, and that's that even the vicar is disturbed, well then, I must understand what the vicar believes. You see, the clergy are not often given to flights of imagination. If he doubts, then so must Weathy Chapel lay at the far end of the Wilton property, across a lawn now slick with dew. The air smelled of moss and wet earth, and the thick hedges bordering the graveyard rustled faintly with a breeze too gentle to be the Mythe grave in question. Harold Wilton's stood precisely in the middle of a cleared road. The others bore weathered names and unreadable dates, their stone faces turned inward with time, but Harold's was stark white and almost luminous in the fading light, and sure enough, as Hastings noticed, the ground around it was still moist, whereas the rest of the graveyard lay dry to dry ezo. Something had actively resisted the rain. The effect was uncanny. The watermarks are fresh. Hastings murmured. Poirot leaned closer, inspecting the edge, the grave, then glanced upward. There are no trees overhead, nothing to funnel the water, and no uneven ground. Hastings added, checking. Poole nodded. Once be, then it is unnatural, and the unnatural, when it occurs around a death, always has a source. They approached the chapel, a squat structure of ancient stone, half drowned in ivy and shadows. The door was slightly ajar and inside warm. Candlelight flickered from near the altar. A quiet voice echoed with thine end. Forgive those who trespass against us. The vicar, Reverend Basil Hargrove, was a tall, spare man in his late 60s, with a gentle, almost melancholy face, hesitant as they entered, offering a cordial nod that carried the weariness off to one who had seen too many graves filled. He said, recognizing them, "You must be the Reverend Hargreaves Borello." Replied with a small bow, "We have come at the request of Lady Wilton. Her concern is considerable." The vicar gestured for them to sit in the pews. "Yes, poor woman, she's been distraught. Since Harold passed, I conducted the Tierre de Bay service myself. But lately, I confess, I've begun to wonder whether her fears aren't quintessential unfounded." "You refer to the Rain Hastings?" asked the vicar, gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Yes, that it sounds mad, doesn't it? But I wash your gentleman. I was locked in the chapel after. Evensong, when the storm came, it lasted 5 minutes, perhaps less, but it rained only on that one grave I walked among. The others afterward, dry as bone." Poirot leaned forward. "Is there anyone in the village or the estate who might have wished Harold ill?" The Reverend frowned. "No. That's a difficult thing to say, Harold. He was troubled. I think restless, a bright boy. But he returned from university, rather changed, took talking alone at odd hours, argued frequently with his father, that much ignosome. Of the villagers thought him aloof. Any quarrels, Pooh pressed. Servant, debts left, unpaid." Hargreaves hesitated. "There was something a few weeks before the accident. I saw Harold in the chapel late at night, hadn't seen me. He was kneeling beside the altar speaking to someone, but when I came closer, there was no one there, only a small burnt envelope left on the floor. What became of it?" Quo asked quickly. "I still have it," said the vicar. "I didn't know what to do with it. I've kept it here." He rose and disappeared into Thievery, returning moments later with a small tin box. Inside lay a charred envelope, scorched at the corners, but the name still visible in faint blue ink. Poirot, allowed to SM burn after reading. Turned it over. The flap had been torn, not cut. The contents were Ganado. "You know who SM might be, Hastings?" asked the Reverend. Shook his head. "I've seeked around. No one admits to those initials." Poirot rose and walked to the chapel window. Through it, the lone grave stood just visible, pale against the darkening grass. He spoke without turning. "There is something here, Reverend. A secret, buried not 6 feet under, but only just out of reach, and secrets, one left unattended, often wrought faster than bodies." He turned back. "Thank you for your time. Please do not mention our visit, not Yeda's." They stepped out into the night. The wind had picked up and the moon was rising. The graveyard looked different now, less like a resting place, more like a field of questions. Pooh paused beside Harold's headstone. The rain was real. "The ground is damp. The trick, Hastings, is not in the water." Pew. "The man who made us notice it. And what about the initials?" Hastings asked. Pooh smiled faintly. "Let us find SM, mon ami, for I believe they did not receive the letter, or else they never meant to burn each chapter." 3. The housekeeper, who heard the rain tough next morning, broke with the eerie stillness peculiar to large country estates. Stead, hush, where the world appears, paused, as though it too awaits the first footsteps in the gravel. Drive, Wren Hollow, with its ivy-strangled facade and mist-veiled grounds, seemed even quieter than the village below, but Poirot was already awake and dressed, sipping a small cup of coffee with precise slowness as Hastings descended the staircase. "You're up early." Hastings, moderating his dressing gown. "I have been up since 6. Poirot replied. "One must allow the little gray cells time to prepare." He stood, setting the cup down with surgical neatness. "Come, Hastings, we are to speak to the housekeeper, Miss Agnes Bleeth." "Why, her, teacher?" Hastings asked superficially. The vicar was more directly connected. Poirot raised a finger. "Norma nor me. The Reverend gave us facts, but it's Blythe. She gives us the texture of this household, the sounds, the silences, the things people forget they say aloud when she is in the room." They found Miss Blythe in the east wing, arranging dread lavender in a vase with the sort of reverence usually reserved for sacred ritualology. Was a thin woman of about 50, with sharp eyes and a spine that refused to bend. "Gentlemen," she said briskly, not pausing in her task, "Lady Wilton said you might call on me this morning. I've made tea." "I thank you," said Poirot, sitting delicately on the edge of a chintz armchair. "We will not take much of your time, but tell me, you have been with the Wilton family for many years?" "Yes, since Harold was a boy," she said, placing the flowers just so I knew him better than his tutors did. "I dare say, smart lad, lonely sometimes, but kind when he wasn't trying to impress his father and Lady Wilton." Poirot prompted a good woman, Miss Bell said firmly, but too silent for her own good. "She watches things, and sometimes I think she sees more than she lets on." Poirot nodded. "Then perhaps you can help us see clearly. Tell me about the night of Harold's death." The housekeeper's hands paused. She turned slowly. "Tea forgotten it was raining," she said. "Not hard, just that steady sort of drizzle that settles into the bones. We'd finished supper. Lord Wilton was reading in his study. Lady Wilton had gone upstairs. Early migraine, she said. Harold had gone riding in the woods just before dusk, said he needed to clear his head." She folded her arms, then around. 9, we heard hooves, fast, too fast, and then the crash. Hastings leaned forward. "What kind of crash?" "Like something split," she said. "Not just a fall something." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The saddle, maybe, or a branch?" "I didn't know, but I ran outside with the gardener we found Harold at the base off the slope near the old ash tree." She hesitated, her mouth tightening. "But that's not the part I remember most." "No?" Poirot prompted softly. She looked at them, eyes steady. "It's the rain. It stopped completely for maybe 30 seconds, just when we found him. No sound, no drops, nothing." Poirot did not interrupt them. It started again, just as suddenly. It was like the world held its breath. Pugh said nothing for several seconds. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Did anyone else notice this?" She shook her head. "Not that I've heard, and I didn't say it half time. Didn't want them thinking I was dafted." "You are not," Poirot said firmly, "and you have just told me something very important." He stood. "One final question, if you please. Had Harold quarreled with anyone recently? A friend, perhaps? A servant?" Miss Bell hesitated again, then reluctantly, there was something with the footman James. Just a few days before Harold Deedy heard raised voices in the corridor. Couldn't make out the words, but James was shaking. "Where is this James now?" Poirot asked. "Still here," she said, "but he's been quiet since he keeps to himself." "Okay." Poirot nodded. "We will speak to him next. Merci. It's Belial. You have been most helpful." They stepped back into the hallway. Hastings spoke first. "It stopped raining when Harold died." "That's rather chilling indeed," Poirot said. "Nature does know to arrange these tableaux for drama, Hastings, but men do, and that is what troubles them." They found James, the young footman in the stables, brushing down one of the horses. He was no more than 23, with a nervous energy that crackled just beneath the surface. Poirot watched him for a moment before speaking. "Right, Mr. James," the boy started, startled. Oh yes, a little. When the family lets us use the older mares." Poirot nodded. "And you were close to Master Harold?" James hesitated. "Not exactly close, sir, but I looked up to him. He was clever. Miss Blythe said you argued with him the week before he died." James went still. the brush hovering above the horse's flank. "Did she?" "You did," Hastings said gently. "You don't deny it." Then James sighed. "No, I suppose it shouldn't." He'd found a letter, said it had my name on it, but it didn't. It had Simeon Elsa's initials. SM, and I told him as much, but he wouldn't let it go. Pooh's eyes sharpened. "What did the letter contain?" "I never read it," James said quickly, but Harold looked scared when he opened it. Said he had to burn it, that it proved someone close to him was lying. Poirot folded his hands. "And did he burn it?" James nodded yes, right after he left the chapel that night. "But I know he wrote another, and he said he'd hidden it somewhere. No one would think to look." Poirot straightened slowly. "Mercy, James, you have told us exactly what we need to know." They walked away. Hastings muttered, "Another letter hidden. What next?" "A secret passage." Poirot did not smile. "You joke, Hastings, but we are not far from that." He paused, glancing back toward the house. "One grave that receives rain." A watch stopped at 4:16. A letter burned, another concealed end. Now a moment of silence. In a storm he looked down at his shoes, muddy from the chapel path. "Tell me, Hastings, what would you do if you wished to make a death? It looked like an accident, but leave just enough strangers for Simeon specific to come looking." Hastings blinked. "You means?" Poirot said quietly. "I believe this was not merely murder. It was an invitation chapter for the letter in the mirror frame later that afternoon. The light in Wren Hollow shifted, not dramatically but subtly, as though the sun itself had grown uncertain of its place. The sky pale and thin as paper cast, no warmth through the windows, only a muted gray that made every object in the house seem older, more brittle. Pew had taken to pacing the halls, not in frustration, never that, but in that slow, deliberate manner of his when arranging mental pieces of a puzzle not yet complete. His polished shoes clicked softly against the parquet flooring as he moved from painting to painting, vase to vase, as if interrogating each one in turn. Hastings trailed behind, arms crossed. Say, Poirot, it's beginning to feel like you already know something you were not saying, maybe?" "I'm sure," Pooh replied, pausing at a brass candelabra. "Always know something." "I do not say that is what it means to investigate sins," huffed. "You're being smug again." No, merely precise." They passed through the upper corridor of the west wing, where the guest rooms were located. Pooh suddenly stopped outside one in particular. Harold Wilton stood there a moment, eyes not on the door, but on the mirror that hung to its left. "A curious thing," he said. "What is?" asked Hastings, peering at the mirror. "Looks ordinary to me." Poirot took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the pad to the frame. A soft clink, metallic, almost imperceptible, echoed faintly. Hastings blinked. "Did something fall?" "No," Poirot whispered. Something shifted. He reached upward, slid his finger carefully along the frame's inner groove, and then, with one firm push, dislodged the backing board behind it. Tucked in the narrowest of compartments was a folded slip of thick ivory paper. Pugh extracted it with great care. The paper was old, but preserved. The handwriting, dark and angular, was unmistakably masculine. Poirot opened it slowly and read aloud. "If you were reading this, it means I did not have the courage to say it aloud. The man who watches the chapel at night is not who claims to be. I have seen the records. The name is false. The past is false. The rain is not God's judgment. It is his reminder. Ask him what happened. Tough girl from Cambridge SM knows. But I no longer trust anyone to tell the truth." There was no signature, but at the bottom of the page, in faint pencil, was written 416. Hastings drew in a sharp breath. "That is time." The watch stopped. Poole folded the note, tucked it into his jacket pocket. Exactamo, the man who is not brave enough to speak now, speaks from shadows in this SM. Whoever they are may hold the key to all of it. He turned suddenly. We must return to the village. The village Hastings echoed to speak Toham to the old solicitor. Poirot said Lady Wilton mentioned him in passing. Harold had gone to see him not long before his death. Something about an inheritance question, but what if it was not financial advice? He saw left the manor at once, the motorway car humming down the gravel drive as deathfog began to creep once more from the Triine. The village of Lower Dumbleton had only one solicitor's office, Wickham, fielding its name painted in gilt above a sun-warped door inside. The walls were lined with dust ledges, and a scent of musty vellum hung in the air. A clerk led them to a back office where Mr. Alcott, Fielding, thin and bespectacled, looked up from his paper with surprised Mrs. Poirot and Hastings. He greeted them. "I'd heard you were a beaut. Can I do for you?" Poirot got straight to the point. "Mr. Fielding, did the late Harold Wilton consult you before his death?" The solicitor nodded. "Yes. 2 weeks prior, he came in quite suddenly, requested access to certain sealed family documents." "May I ask what documents those were?" Fielding looked hesitant. "Technically, they were records of his mother's inheritance, rather dull, but the boy was fixated, in particular on a private endowment given to the church here in 1912 under the name of Seraphina Markham." "Seraphina Markham," Poirot repeated. S.M. Fielding blinked. "You know the name?" "Not yet," Pooh murmured, "but I began to see the shape of her shadow." The solicitor leaned back, clearly intrigued. "Strange thing is she disappeared that same year, just vanished. No marriage, no death certificate, no mention of her after that. The vicar at the time wrote a letter, said she'd left the parish in disgrace." Hastings asked. Kid Fielding raised an eyebrow. "There were whispers of a child out of wedlock." "Nothing confirmed, of course, but her name was stricken from the donation registry by hand." Quite unusual. Poirot sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the information. Then he rose. "Mercy, Mr. Fielding, you have been most helpful." As they stepped out into the lane, once more, Hastings looked bewildered. "What on earth does a vanished woman from 1912 have to do with Harold Wilton?" "Everything, Hastings," Poirot replied, "because the past, when buried improperly, grows restless." He looked up at the sky. The clouds were gathering again, not overhead, but in the direction of Wren Hollow, and Poirot, for the first time since arriving, looked worried. Chapter 5. The rain returns at dusk. Ride back to Wren Hollow was silent, not uncomfortable. Not between Hastings and Poole, but pensive. Hastings drove with both hands tightly on the wheel, occasionally casting glances in the rearview mirror at the sky behind them. The clouds were swelling there, low and dark, like a bruise on the horizon. Day hadn't been there when they left for the village. Eppo beside him sat utterly still, fingertips pressed together beneath Hishin, as though holding a fragile thought. And Placithi reached the manor gates just as the first drops began to fall. The rain at first was hesitant, a question rather than an answer, but it gathered strength with every turn of the gravel, until, by the time they pulled into the front circle, it was unmistakable. "A cold, direct downpour," Hastings said, peering through the windshield. "Only raining here, nothing at all in the village." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "Just like before." Yes. They stepped out and hurried. Under the portico, a figure emerged from the side path, soaked, frantic, and waving his arms. It was George, the Wiltons' head gardener, a broad-chested man with permanently dirt-caked hands and a nose reddened by years of outdoor work. "More Poirot, sir. You'd better come quick." He puffed, wiping water from his brow. It sharpened again. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The grave George nodded, pale. "It's wet again, just the one. I was out pruning the west hedges when the rain started. Walked past the chapel, all the grounds dry, but his same as before." Poirot turned to Hastings without a word and set off toward the chapel path. They crossed the lawn swiftly, boots squelching in the mud. The graveyard once again was silent. The rain fell steadily. Something was strange, unnatural. Poirot stepped past the chapel wall and froze. The entire graveyard lay damp, but not drenched. The stones were dusted with moisture. But Harold Wilton's grave, the center one, was soaked through the ground. Around it turned to sodden sludge water, running into knee revels across the grass like tears around a wound. And more curious lather was a bouquet of fresh lilacs, not the kind sold in the village market, not the kind grown in the estate gardens. These were white and perfect petals, marked by rain, placed with care. No card, no ribampu. Knelt carefully, examining the stems. They were left less than an hour ago, he murmured. See, the imprint in the soil. The ground hadn't softened yet. Whoever brought these came just before the rain. But who? Hastings asked, scanning the empty grounds. Someone who wanted to be seen only by the dead. Poirot said darkly. Hen did rose and turned to George. Has anyone left the house recently? Not through the main drive. George said I'd have seen him, but there's the east path runs behind the old orchard, leads to the woods. Poirot nodded. Once we shall follow it. Come. They moved quickly. Poirot nth. Lead Hastings and George close. Behind the east path was overgrown but clear. Enough birds scattered ahead of them in bursts. After 5 minutes, they reached the edge of the orchard, where an old stone wall crumbled in places marked the border of the estate. There, caught in the brambles, was a scrape-puff black lace pool. Retrieved it gently. It was delicate, expensive, and damp but not soaked. Whoever passed here had come just before the rain. He turned to Hastings. This, he said, holding the lace between two fingers, is not from a servant's uniform. It is hand-stitched, likely Italian. Hastings frowned. Then, who? Guard. I didn't answer. He was staring at the woods ahead, eyes calculating. They turned back silent again, and as they passed through the orchard, something else caught Hastings's eye. A tree stump, hollowed and blackened. From the inside. Well, he said, pointing. That's where they burned something. Poirot moved quickly to it. Inside, the remnants of vapor, fine ivory ash. He bent low and pulled a single unburnt edge from the pile on it. A faint blue SSM. Again, Hastings' aid. Poirot didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood and looked skyward. Hastings, someone is trying very hard to tell a story in fragments, but the story they are telling is not the truth. They returned to the manor at dusk. Soaked in wind-blown Lady Wilton was waiting in the drawing room. Pale but composed, she looked up as they erotic bend to the grave. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, and we are closer than ever to understanding. What Poirot stepped forwardly, that your son's death was not a solitary act. It was the culmination of a secret that has rotted in this house for more than a generation. Someone is using rain to draw attention to a grave, but it is not Harold's secret there, trying to reveal. Lady Wilton blinked, clearly shaken. Then whose Poirot paused, and then very quietly said, your chapter 6. The photograph behind the piano. There was a silence so compulsive. Poirot's final word, yours, that even the wind seemed to pause outside of the drawing room windows. Lady Wilton didn't speak at first. Her face had gone pale, not with fear, but something more layered, as if she had long expected such a moment and was merely dreading its irreval. Poirot stood with his hands lightly clasped before him. He was not triumphant, was not accusing. He was simply waiting, as he often did, for the truth to catch up with the words he'd just spoken. Lady Wilton finally turned to the fireplace and steadied herself on the mantel. Her voice was quiet. You believe it? This is about me? I do not believe, Madame, Poirot said gently. I observed, Auntie, have observed several things. The letter tucked behind the mirror, from me the initials SM, which recurred with strange consistency. Now, a woman's lace fragment dropped along the path that only Sumian family are. This estate would know this is not an outsider's tale. This is who's unraveling from within. Lady Wilton did not look at him. And what is it you think? I've hidden Miss Poirot, not murder, Poirot said, but memories turned, then eyes hollow, but no longer. Defensive Emery can kill more slowly than bullets. Poirot inclined his head. So I have seen Hastings would have been watching this exchange with the kind of wide-eyed restraint he reserved for the drawing rooms of the well-bred. Finally interjected, I don't mean to press Lady Wilton, but some Seraphina Markham did. You know her. Lady Wilton looked at Hastings, her lips parting slightly. Yes, I knew her. Poirot did not react, only waited. She was my cousin, Lady Wilton said at last, my father's illegitimate niece. She was taken in quietly by the family when Al was a child, kept out of sight of society. I suppose we were meant to be friends. She was only 2 years older, and we were for a time. But Seraphina was wild, beautiful, daring in ways that embarrassed the family. She pounced then, said something unexpected, and Harold loved her. There was a beat of Silence. Pardon, Hastings said, blinking. But how she vanished years before he was born. Lady Wilton nodded. Yes, that's the mystery, isn't it? She disappeared in 1912, but Harold found her letters. Found photograph spool. Stepped forward, gently. Photographs, madame. Yes, she whispered behind the piano tucked into the backboard. My late husband played occasionally thoroughly well, and Harold would tinker there as a boy one afternoon 2 years ago. He dismantled part of it, trying to understand the acoustics. That's when he found him. She walked slowly across the room toward the grand piano. That Sappho forgotten in the corner, its lid shut, a layer of dust thick on its top. Poirot and Hastings followed. Lady Wilton knelt, her fingers tracing Queeg with grain. She pressed gently at the lower panel. There was a soft click, and the board slid out. An inch inside a slim leather envelope. She retrieved it and handed it to Poirot, who opened it. Carefully inside were 3 photographs, black and white, faintly blurred, but unmistakably intimate. In one, Seraphina stood beside a chapel window. In another, she held Occult, its face turned toward her shoulder. And in the third, she was seated in the chapel's front pew, her head turned, gazing directly into the lens. Poirot examined the child. Photograph. This is not Harold, he said, but someone like him. Lady Wilton nodded. I never knew who the child was. My father never spoke of Seraphina after she left the letters. Harold said there were dozens, but he never saw them. He must have hidden them elsewhere. In the photograph in the chapel, Poirot asked, that was taken here, eyes. That's our chapel. No question. Poirot carefully returned the photographs to tie the case, and yet no one ever came forward. Not Seraphina, not the child. No explanation, no scandal, just rain. Lady Wilton gave a broken laugh. You have to understand, this family silences things. That's how we survive. We bury embarrassment, we polish overwrought, we act as though nothing has happened until we believe it. Poirot looked thoughtful, and yet Harold would not abide that. He searched, he challenged, he dug. Lady Wilton sat heavily in the nearest armchair. He said he thought he was related to her somehow, said he felt it, but I told him it was impossible. He was furious, said I was lying, that someone was lying. Poirot nodded slowly. Perhaps they were about Harold did not die because of old secrets. He died because he uncovered something someone else wanted. Buried again. Lady Wilton looked up. And you think Seraphina's story is behind it? Poirot clasped his hands. I think it is the key, but we are missing the lock. Heading to Hastings. Come, Wanami, let us return to the chapel. The chapel again? Hastings asked. We've been there 3 times. We, Poirot said, but now we go to see, not what is there, but what is missing us. They stepped once more into the chill of the evening air. The rain had lightened into mist, a barely there drizzle that clung to the skin. In hollow behind them seemed to recede into shadow, as though retreating from its own truth. And as they approached the chapel, something new greeted them. The door was sage, not white, just cracked poil, stepped in slowly. And there, in the first pew, was a fresh envelope on it, a single letter written in blue ink, Chapter 7, the initial that should not exist. Pooh did not move at once. The envelope sat on the pew like a calling card, conspicuous only in its restrainto. Sent no wax seal, no visible fingerprints, just one single perfect letter written in blue ink on pale paper. He tilted his head, slightly examining it from a distance, as though proximity might shatter the illusion. Hastings spoke first, lowering his voice. Instinctively, it wasn't here. Earlier, I would have seen it. No, Poirot murmured. It was placed after we last left, and deliberately. So facing forward, awaiting notice, whoever lifted knows we will return carefully. Poirot reached for his clothes, lighting them on before lifting the envelope. It was unsealed, opened the flap with the letter opener from his pocket, and drew out a single folded sheath, read silently for several seconds. Then he handed it to Hastings. I'm not looking in the right direction. It was never about Scarafani. It was always about who lied to protect her. The boy died, not because he searched for the past, but because he stepped too close to the present. The ring was thorny. The next one would be the curtain call asked. Mabel, she was there the night it started. There was no signature. Poirot lowered his head slightly, as if bowing to an invisible opponent. Curious, he whispered. Not Serafina, but someone knew who protected her, someone still alive. Hastings furrowed his brow. Mabel, who-ish? P's eyes flashed at that. Is the question, mon ami. We must find her. He stood, but before that, considered the signature, or rather, the lack of it. Butit says M. Hastings offered. Pugh shook his head. Exactly. It says M, not SM, not Serafta. Markham, a new player one, who knows the game and its stakes, but whose is only an initial one that does not match any household name. He paused. There is no M in this family. Hastings thought for a moment. What about the servants? Any Mabel, unstaffed? Poirot's eyes sharpened. No, not presently, but long ago perhaps. We must ask. Miss Blythe again. They exited the chapel. Just as the clouds thickened once more above the hill, the mist was beginning to darken, taking on a strange, greenish tint, as though the land itself disapproved. Au fait, it was about to remember. Back at the manor, Miss Blythe was found in the library, wiping down bookshelves with a care that implied memory rather than duty. Poirot entered softly. Miss Blythe, he said, I must trouble you. Again she turned, clearly expecting him. You found something, she said, not asked. Co-England. His had a letter signed only MIT, refers to a woman named Abel, said to have witnessed something important. Miss Blythe straightened, her jaw tightened, eyes flicking to the far Wally. Haven't heard that name in years. Pooh said nothing. She sighed. Mabel, of course, she was a scullery maid here before the war, bright girl, too pretty for her own goods. Left suddenly no explanation, but there were rumors about Seraphinese. Miss Bell said quietly. She and Mabel were close. Whispers started when Seraphine appeared. Lord Wilton's father handled it privately. No investigation, no statements, just silence. Poirot stepped closer. Do you know where? Shouldn't. Miss Bell hesitated then. After a moment, she walked to a locked drawer and pulled out a dusty address book. Its cover cracked pages, yellowed at the edges. She flipped to a worn page and pointed. Milbull sent a card the year after she left. No return. Address, what she mentioned, Eda boarding house in Brinley. That's the village past the western ridge. Pua took note. Then that is where we go. Miss Blythecott's arm. If she's still alive, you think she knows what happened at Pooh met her eyes? I think she knows what began at Dijon. Hour later, Hastings's motor car groaned up the narrow incline that led to Brinley. it was a quieter village then. Dumbleton, more scattered, more forgotten even. The signposts leaned to one side, as if we, a bearing bad news found the boarding house easily enough, a whitewashed structure with shutters that had long since given up on closing the matron. A grim-looking woman with ink-stained fingers greeted them with visible suspicion. Prue presented his card. "We are looking for a woman who once stayed here. Mabel Gorse, perhaps, still residing." The matron frowned. "Lived here till last year moved. Sta up road keeps to herself house with the green cataminutes." Later, they stood before the house. It was small, slanted, and quiet vacant of house that belonged to someone who no longer waited for visitors. Boo knocked, the door opened slowly, and there she was, Mabel Gorse, white-haired no, but unmistakably composed, with sharp, sunken eyes and hands that trembled only slightly. On the edge of the doorframe, "I've been expecting." "Q," she said. Pu's brows lifted. "Have you, mademoiselle?" She nodded. "I saw the rain, only one grave chest, liked." Before Poirot stepped inside, without another word, Hastings followed, heart pounding the past day. Both knew was no longer content to lie still. Chapter 8. Mabel's confession. In the shadow of the lamp, the interior of Mabel Gorse's small sitting room was both sparse and intimate, bathed in the warm flickering glow of a single oil lamp. The shadows it cast danced across the worn wallpaper, peeling slightly at the edges and pulled deep in the corners, hiding years. Off scrits, Mabel sat stiffly in an armchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot took a seat opposite, her eyes calm but penetrating. Hastings remained standing near the door, uncertain whether to offer comfort or respect the heavy silence. After a long pause, Mabel spoke, her voice brittle, yet steady. "I suppose you want to know why I left Trent Hollow all those years ago?" Poole inclined his head. "May we, and why Yahave stayed silent until now?" She nodded, slowly, her gaze fixed on Phelim's flickering flame. "It was the year Seraphina disappearable began. She came to me that spring, desperate, scared. She told me she was pregnant, that the father was someone very powerful, someone no one dared accuse." Mabel's voice broke for the first time. Tried to keep it secret, but rumors spread like wildfire in those halls. Lord Wilton's father forbade Seraphina from returning to the village. She begged me to run away with her. I refused. I was frightened. She took a deep breath. Seraphina was found dead. Weeks later, drowned in the river. They said it was an accident, but ik knew it was not. Poole leaned forward, and Harold, what did discover? Mabel's eyes flickered. He found Thelatore's, our letters, hidden in the piano. He wanted to clear her name to make that truth known, but that meant exposing the family. She paused. That's why he died and not be accident. Someone made sure. Hastings felt a cold shiver crawled up his Poirot's fingers, drummed lightly on his knee. In the rain, Mabel's gaze darkened. The rain is a signal, a reminder, a warning to those who know. She rose slowly. I stayed silent because I was afraid, but now the past will not stay buried, and I can no longer protect the liar's. Pool stood as well, Melly. Okay. Mabel, you have been very brave outside. The wind began to stir, carrying with it the first distant rumble of thunder. Chapter 9. Okay. The gathering storm at Wren Hollow. The return journey to Wren Hollow was cloaked in the heavy silence that only a storm can bring, the kind of quiet that weighs on the soul, promising upheaval. Dark clouds swirled overhead, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the winding road ahead. Like fleeting specters inside the manor, the atmosphere was taut like the string of a violin pulled just to the edge. Lady Wilton awaited them in the drawing room, her usual composed manner mounting with a nervous edge. She rose as they entered, eyes flickering between Poirot and Hastings. Have you learned anything? She asked, voice brittle. Poirot nodded gravely. Mabel Course has spoken. The truth is closer than we imagined, all with old wounds, betrayals, and long hidden lies. Lady Wilton's face palled. Then what must be done first? We must assemble those who live under this roof, Poirot said firmly. It is time. The circle of suspicion tightens. Hastings frowned. You mean confront them all? Yes, only when all are present can the cracks begin to show. Kate, the guilty, revealed themselves over the next hour. The residents and staff gathered in the great hall. Lord Wilton, still brooding in defense of Lady Wilton, fragile yet resolute, the butler, the housekeeper Miss Blythe, and James Footman, their faces a mixture of curiosity, dread, and barely concealed hostility. Poirot stood in the center, calm and commanding Madame Jour. He began, "We're here, 'cause a grave injustice has been hidden too long a death, not as it seems, and a rain that falls on only one grave." He paused, scanning each face carefully. Tonight, the truth will be sought not by force, but by the weight of your own consciences. The storm outside intensified, thunder crashing, as if on cue. Poirot's eyes rested on Lord Wilton, who had been silent for too long. "Monsieur, it is time to speak." The tension was palpable. Lord Wilton's voice was low but steady. "I have nothing to say. The past is the past." Pooh smiled faintly, "and yet it is the past that has brought us Herreus." The night's deepened secrets began to unravel. Whispered accusations, half-truths, and veiled confessions. The beast storm raged on, but inside Wren Hollow a greater tempest brewed. Chapter 10. The first crack in the Agatha, great hall of Wren Hollow, thick with tension as the night wore on. The storm outside battered the windows, rain lashing against the glass in furious torrents, but it was the tempest inside that held everyone captive. Poirot stood calmly, his gaze steady as he addressed the assembled group. "Let us speak plainly," he began. "The Harold Wilton's death was not an accident, nor was it a tragedy. Without design, someone here chose to silence a young man determined to uncover a long-buried secret." The butler cleared his throat nervously. "Surely, MSC Poirot, you do not mean to accuse anyone without evidence?" "Evidence, indeed," Poirot replied with a slight smile, "which is why, I ask each of you now, where were you at the time of the accident?" One by one, alibis were offered, some solid, some tenuous. James, the footman, fidgeted his eyes. Darting eye was in the stables, tending to the horse. Miss Bill said, "I was preparing the evening meal in the kitchen." Lady Wilton's voice trembled slightly. "I was resting in my room with a migraine." Lord Wilton's expression darkened. "I was in my study." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Very well, but alibis alone do not explain the strange occurrences around Harold's grave. The rain falling only there, the burned letters, the lace on the orchard path." He turned to Miss Bell. "You mentioned quarrel between James and Harold. What was that?" Abuchi hesitated. "It was about a letter Harold found, one addressed to SM. He believed it implicated someone close to the family." "Exactly," Poirot said. "And who would benefit from silencing Harold?" A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Wilton's eyes filled with tears. "He was trying to protect us." "To protect me, or to expose you?" Poe counted soft lithe room, fell silent, the weight of accusation hanging heavily. Poirot moved closer to Lord Wilton. "Monsieur, I believe you have been withholding the truth." Lord Wilton's jaw clenched. "And what truth is that?" Poirot's eyes glittered. "That the past is not as buried as you hoped. That secrets of Seraphina, Markham, and Mabel, of course, still live here, and that Harold's death was a desperate attempt to keep them hidden." First crack in the facade had appeared. Chapter 11. Confessions. In the candlelight, the flickering candlelight in the graceful cast, long shadows deepening the atmosphere as each person wrestled with the weight of Poirot's accusations. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed like a reminder that the storm outside was far from spent Lord Wilton's stoic facade. Finally cracked, he stepped forward, voice low, but carrying the unmistakable tremor of suppressed emotion. "Very well, Kay," he said. "I will speak, but not for you, Poirot. For my family." All eyes fixed on him as he began. "Seraphina Markham was my father's niece. Yes, a secret kept from the world. She was spirited, reckless, and caught in a scandal that threatened the family name. When she became pregnant, my grandfather saw only one option to send her away. Taslin, sir. What happened afterward is still a wound I carry." He paused, glancing at Lady Wilton, who looked away. Harold found pieces of this history letter's photographs. He believed the truth should be known, that we should face our past, but the family feared ruin. And when Harold confronted us with these secrets, well, the accident was no accident. His voice broke slightly. "I tried to protect his family name, but I fear I have only deepened the pain, Lady Wilton." Stepping forward, voice trembling. Harold was a good boy, brave. He wanted justice, Miss Blythe. And James exchanged guilty glances, but said nothing. Poirot's gaze softened, but remained piercing. "Your confessions bring us closer, but that puzzle is not yet complete. There remains the matter of Mabel Gores and the warnings carried." He turned to the group. "Someone here knows more than they have told. The final pieces are within reach, but they willingly fall into place. If the truth is embraced, not feared." The storm outsider reached its crescendo, rain pounding relentlessly as though cleansing the earth of long hidden sins. Chapter 12. The Truth Beneath. The Astray, the morning after the storm, was a brittle dawn, the air crisp and sharp with the promise of revelations. Wren Hollow, drenched and muted, bore the wheat of the night's confessions. Like a grave burden, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the old ash tree, the very place where Harold had met his untimely end. The ground beneath was still, soft, scarred by its struggle that no one had dared speak of in full. Poirot knelt, inspecting the earth closely, eyes sharp beneath his furrowed brow. "Hastings," he said quietly, "this is where the mystery takes root." He traced a faint imprint near the bay's off tree, a circle of disturbed soil partially hidden by fallen leaves and twigs. "Notice," Poirot continued, "the soil has been recently turned, as though something was buried or exhumed." Hastings looked puzzled. "Are you suggesting that something was hidden here after Harold dug?" "Precisely," Poirot said. "And what better place than beneath the tree whereat this accident was staged?" They cleared away leaves, carefully exposing a small rusted box. Poirot opened it. With delicate fingers inside lay a collection of letters, sealed envelopes, and a small folded piece of parchment. Poirot unfolded the parchment. Written in a spidery hand was a confession, one that named names, revealed betrayals, and spoke of love, fear, and desperation. "It seems," Poirot murmured, "that the final truth was meant to be found only by those who sought it." "Truly." He turned to Hastings. "We must read this carefully. It holds the key to the entire affair." As they read, the pieces fell into Platia. Web of deceit and protection of sins committed in the name of family, at the terrible cost of silence. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a shaft of light upon the ashed tree, as if nature herself wished towerness. The unveiling. Chapter 13. Shadows in the familiar portrait. The revelation beneath the ashed tree had cast a new light over Wren Hollow, but as the day stretched on the manor, it still seemed to thicken with an oppressive silence. The house held its breath, as though anticipating the next turn in the unraveling. Mr. Poirot sat in the drawing room, the box of letters carefully spread before him on the polished mahogany table. Hastings was at his side, both poring over the fragile parchments, every word heavy with consequence. "Every letter is a confession," Poirot mused, his fingers delicately turning applique, "and every confession pulls at the threads of this tangled Family tapestry. Hastings nodded, slowly running his hand through his hair. It's astonishing script that's been smothered for decades, and yet it's all here, written in ink and pain. Pugh's gaze drifted to the grand family portrait hanging above the fireplace. The canvas was dark and brooding, a cluster of stern faces staring out with the cold formality of old money lady Wilton's. Mother, stoic and pale, stood at the center, flanked by ancestor shoe, seemed to glare from the past. Look closely, Hastings, Poirot said softly. Portraits often tell more than the sitter's intent. Noticed the shadows cast not only by light, but by what is left unsaid, pointed to the far right of the canvas, where a figure had been painted over the faint outline of a woman's face. Visible beneath layers of dark varnish, that was Seraphina Markham, Poe explained, removed after the scandal broke. Erased from memory, but not from the story. Hastings peered at the portrait, a chill running down his spine. It's like the family tried to bury her twice. Exactly, Poe agreed, and yet the shadows were interrupted by the arrival of Lady Wilton. Her face, drawn but resolutely, heard you were examining the past again, she said quietly. I must show you something. She led them down a narrow corridor to Asmal's locked room, a private study forgotten by most of the household inside. The air was thick with dust and neglect, but the walls were lined with shelves, crammed with old ledgers, diaries, and bundles of correspondence. Lady Wilton retrieved a worn, leather-bound journal and handed it to Poirot. This belonged to my grandmother, she said. It chronicles the family's secrets. Her own hand, she tried to protect us, but also to warn us. Poirot opened the journal carefully. The entries were written in a precise hand, detailing the family's fear and shame. When Seraphina's pregnancy became known, the desperatises taken to conceal her, and the subsequent attempts to control Harold I. Entry caught my eye. Lady Wilton said, her voice trembling slightly. It speaks of a betrayal that will echo through generations. Poe read aloud. The past cannot be contained like a shadow at dusk. It will stretch long and dark, touching all who remain, blind to its presence. He looked up, meeting Lady Wilton's eyes. This is why Harold was silenced, Poirot said softly, because he threatened to expose not only Seraphina's fate, but the complicity of those still living in the room seemed to close in on them. Hastings swallowed hard. Who among us would go this far to protect a secret? A.S. Eyes flickered to the portrait again. Someone with a very thing to lose, and nothing left to further. The afternoon waned into evening, and Poirot requested a private audience with Lord Wilton. The conversation was quiet, but charged a careful dance of wordswear. Much was said, and more left unsaid. Your family's history is stained with silence and sacrifice, Poe told him, but the truth has a way of illuminating darkest corners. Lord Wilton's eyes were weary, but resolutely have tried to keep my family intact, to protect us from scandal. Yet Poirot said protection can become a prison. Long pause settled between them. Poirot continued, I believe the final truth will come from within, from the one who has lived in the shadows longest, Lord. Wilton nodded slowly. Mean Mabel, her confession in the shadow of the lamp was but the beginning. As night fell, the manor seemed poised on the brink of revelation. The shadows in the family portrait, a silent testament to the cast-off buried truths in Hercule Poirot. Poe knew that soon the last piece of the puzzle would fall into place. Chapter 1. The Whisper. Behind the locked door, the manor had settled into an uneasy quiet after the day's revelation. Shads pulled in the corners of every room. The flickering candlelight struggling against the encroaching darkness. Even the storm outside seemed to have abated, leaving behind a damp cold silence that weighed heavily on the bones of Hercule Poirot. Sat alone in the library, his hands steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed in thought. The letters from beneath the ash tree had provided much needed insight, yet a nagging sense of incompleteness tugged at his mind. There was a whisper in the silence, a secret that remained stubbornly out of Hastings entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside Poirot, settled opposite him. The soft creak of his chair breaking the still "Say anything new?" Hastings inquired. Gently Poole opened his eyes and smiled, faintly. "Ah, mon ami, there's always something new when one knows where to look, but tonight must turn our attention to a place yet unexplored in this tangled affair." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "And where might that be?" Poirot's gaze shifted to the far end of the corridor, visible through the library. Doorway, locked room on the 2nd floor, the study of the late Harold Wilton's. Faithful room, sealed for years, untouched since the scandal. Erupted curiosity piqued. Hastings nodded. "Have you found the key?" Poirot reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, ornate key. Its metal dulled with age, Boutant mistakenly crafted with care. "I requested it from the housekeeper," Poe explained. "She said it was kept with the silver keys, long forgotten. It is time we saw what secrets lie behind that door together." They made their way up the grand staircase, the thick carpet muffling their footsteps. The corridor was narrow and lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders as they approached. The locked door broke. Inserted the key into the lock. It resisted momentarily, then turned with a satisfying click. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit study. Dust smells floated lazily in the air, disturbed by their entrance shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound volumes and yellowing papers. A large oak desk sat in the center, cluttered with more papers. A tarnished brass lamp and an open legible. Poirot approached the desk, eyes scanning every detail. The desk lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. Poirot opened at it, carefully revealing pages filled with neat handwriting. This belonged to Harold's father. Poirot murmured, a man burdened with guilt and fear. He began to read aloud an entry dated shortly before Seraphina's disappearance. "Girl threatens to undo everything. Her child must be hidden, or this family's name will be ruined beyond repair. I have taken measures, but the weight grows heavier each day. If only Harold understood the sacrifices made in these name of honor." Hastings frowned, so it was a deliberating act to silence Seraphina, and by extension, Harold. Poole nodded solemnly. "It would appear so, but there is Murray." Flipped through the journal and found another passage, more recent, written in a hurried scroll. Harold's inquiries. "Crow, older, he is close to the truth. I fear the consequences. If he continues tonight, I will confront him. It is a burden I hope to bear." Alanie's implication was clear. The patriarch had been aware of the danger, yet had taken no steps to prevent the inevitable. Poirot's eyes lingered on a small brass key taped to the inside cover of the journal. "This," he said, "may open another secret." He carefully removed the key and examined it. It was smaller and more delicate than the one that had unlocked the study door. "Come," Poirot said, motioning Hastings to follow. They searched the room, inspecting every drawer and cabinet. Finally, Poirot knelt beside a large portrait that hung crookedly on the wall. Behind it was a small locked panel in the woodwork. He inserted the small brass key. The lock clicked softly, and the panel swung open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Poirot untied the ribbon and began to read. "My dearest Seraphina, I cannot birth lies that have been spun around your name. The truth must be known, though it threatens to destroy us all." The letters revealed a forbidden love affair, a promise to protect Seraphina and her child, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. Hastings looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "This changes everything." Poirot nodded, gravely indeed. Hastings The past has been rewritten by those who wish to hide their sins, but these letters will speak where voices fillet thee. Sat in silence, the weight of the revelations settling over them like the lingering dusk outside a captor. 15. The unseen visitor the night had settled over, ran hollow, like a heavy cloak, wrapping the manor in deep shadows, and whispered secrets outside the wind sighed through the ancient trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and earth, a reminder that the storm was never far from these grounds. Inside the house, Poirot and Hastings had retired to the drawing room after their exhaustive search of the hidden compartments. The letters they had uncovered revealed more than mere family scandal. They told of love, betrayal, and desperate attempts to shield the innocent from ruin. Yet, as Poirot carefully folded the fragile papers, a palpable unease lingered in the air. Hastings glanced toward the windows, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the night. "Do you think we are alone here?" he asked. Quiet-lipped, sharp eyes met his friend's. Hastings, in a house such as this, with so many ghosts of the past, one must always be prepared for the presence oft living but not unfelt. Their conversation was interrupted by a faint creaking sound, like a floorboard shifting somewhere. Teeth depths of the manor. Poirot stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Hastings nodded, eyes narrowing. "Someone is moving." A boot-poo rose swiftly, his keen senses alert. "Let us investigate." They moved silently through the dim corridors, the flicker of their candle casting wavering shadows on the walls. The manor felt alive, the very walls seeming to breathe with anticipation. As they reached the entrance to the west wing, Poirot paused, placing a hand on thick gold brass doorknob. The door was slightly ajar. "Simeon has been here recently," Poirot whispered, "and not just that. Someone knows where to look." They pushed the door open cautiously and stepped. Inside the room was Harold Wilton's former study, now scattered with papers and overturned furniture, signs of a hurried search. Hastings surveyed the room. They were looking for something. Poirot's gaze fell upon the desk where a single envelope lay, face down, edges dampened by the chill in the room. He picked it up gingerly, turning it over to reveal a hastily scrawled note. "The truth is closer than you think, but where those who walk in shadows trust no one but yourself." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A warning, no doubt, but from whom? Hastings's gaze drifted to the window, slightly open despite the chill. "Look here, footprints, the wet earth outside." "Okay." "Someone left in a hurry." Poirot knelt, inspecting the tracks carefully. A man's boot size, large, recent, stood slowly. "We have an unseen visitor." Hastings, one who walks these halls with purpose and stealth. Implications were chilling. Back in the drawing room, Poirot gathered the household. "It seems our mystery has a new player, one who fears discovery." Wilton's hands trembled. "Who could it be?" Poirot's voice was steady yet grave. "Someone with knowledge of the past, someone with much to Lazius." The household held its breath. Poirot's mind raced. The game had shifted, and the shadows lengthened. Chapter 16. The secret in the Sealarth. Chill of the evening air clung to Wren Hollow as Poirot and Hastings descended. Key, the narrow stone steps leading to the cellar. K. The faint scent of damp earth and aged timber filled the confined space, mixing with the faint trace of something less definable, something old, hidden and waiting. Poirot's lantern cast a steady circle of light around the cellar's low ceiling walls, revealing rows of dusty wine bottles, stacked crates, and forgotten trunks. The quiet here was heavier than elsewhere in the house, thick with the weight of years and secrets unspoken. Hastings shivered. "I don't like the feel of this place." Mon ami," Poirot replied with a soft smile. "The cellar is the soul's shadow it contains, so that the light above wishes to hide death." He moved deeper into the cellar until Poirot halted before a section of through where the stonework seemed newer, fresher. He ran his hand along the surface, fingers brushing over an uneven seam. "Here," Poirot murmured, "something has been concealed." With practiced precision, he tapped the wheel in a sequence until a faint click echoed through the space. A panel slid open, revealing a cramped, hidden alcove. Inside lay a collection of documents, letters, photographs, in a small wooden box, intricately carved. Poirot gently picked up the box and opened it to reveal a set of keys, a faded locket, a bundle of papers tied with a crimson ribbon. He unfolded the top letter and began to read, "To whomever finds this, know that the truth was buried here. I too protect the innocent and condemn the guilty. The sins of the past are mine alone." Poirot's eyes darkened. This is the confession we have long sought, the final piece to the puzzle. He motioned for Hastings to lean closer. He carefully unfolded the rest of the documents, revealing accounts of bribery, betrayal, and a desperate pact made in the shadows. A story spoke of Serafina's fate, the silencing of dissent, and a promise broken. Hastings exhaled slowly. So many lies to protect a name, yes, Poirot said quietly, but now the name must face the consequences. They emerged from the cellar into the cool night air. The house behind them seemed to sigh, a burden lifted, but at what cost? Chapter 17. The Silent Witness. The early morning light seeped hesitantly through the heavy curtains of Wren Hollow, casting pale shadows upon the wooden floors of the main hall. Despite the calm exterior, the manor's very walls seemed restless, as if awaiting the day's revelations to stir long buried truths. Spew, ever meticulous, was already awake. Seated by the window in the small study adjoining the drawing room, his sharp eyes were fixed on a curious object resting on the desk, a small, ornate music box, its intricate carvings taste shimmering faintly in the dawn. Hastings entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Hugh seemed unusually captivated by that little thing. Pooh smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings' appearances are often deceptive. This music box is the silent witness to more than melodies. Holds clues, not easily spoken. He wound the tiny key on the side, and the delicate teton began to play. Haunting, melancholic, echoing faintly in the quiet room. This belonged to Serafina Markham. Poirot explained it was given to her by Simeon. Very dear, its tune is a unique one that would stir memories in those who heard it long ago. Hastings listened thoughtfully. And what does it tell us? Poirot tapped its box thoughtfully. That someone here remembers someone who heard this tune the night Serafina disappeared. At that moment, the door creaked, opened quietly, and Miss Blythe stepped inside, her face pale but resolute. "I heard the music," she said softly. It was the last thing Serafina played. Bare, she vanished. Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Tell us everything you know, Miss Bell. No detail is too small." She hesitated, then began. "Serafina was afraid. She confided in me, Kai, that she was being watched, that Sumiena had threatened to ruin her if she didn't leave." Quietly, that music box was heavenly comfort. Miss Blythe's eyes filled with tears. "Night, she disappeared. I heard footsteps, hurried, urgent, but I dared not intervene. I was just a servant." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did you see who it was?" Shook her head. "No, but I heard voices, a man and a woman, arguing in the garden." Hastings leaned forward. "Did you recognize the voices, miss?" Bill swallowed her. "Only the woman, Lady Wilton's mother." A heavy silence fell. Poirot stood, the music box's tune winding down. "The silent witness speaks volumes," he said, "and now past and present are intertwined." Chapter 18. The final puzzle piece. Lenora Wren Hollow was heavy with anticipation as the final hours of Betty approached. Shadows lengthened and stretched through the grand halls, wrapping around portraits and relics of the past like a thick fog. The truth was no longer a distant murmur. It had become an urgent, palpable presence. Hugh sat at the center of the drawing room. The letters, photographs, and confessions laid out before him like pieces of an elaborate jigsaw puzzle. High size, sharp, and analytical scanned each fragment, seeking the subtle connection shot would reveal the final truth. Hastings stood nearby, observing the detective's concentrated silence. "Do you feel we are close, Poirot? The end must be near." Poirot nodded slowly. "May we?" Hastings. "The pieces have been scattered far and wide, but they are beginning to align." Room was suddenly filled with the soft sound of footsteps. All turned to see Lady Wilton enter, her expression steely yet resigned. "I have something to show you," she said quietly. She approached a small cabinet and retrieved an old weathered box. Inside were letters, some unsigned, others penned in hurried script documents that had eluded them until now. Poole carefully unfolded the topmost letter and began to read aloud. "To my dearest Harold, the burden I carry is heavy, but it must be shared. The secrets kept in silence have poisoned our family for too long. Trust no one but your heart, for it alone will guide you." Told the truth. The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting was familiar. Poole looked up. "This is the final piece, an acknowledgement from the heart of the mystery. It reveals a secret of love and sacrifice, but also a betrayal." Hastings furrowed his brow. "Who wrote it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Inly, one person could have known the truth and risked everything to tell." I've stood abruptly, pacing toward the fireplace. "The past has been laid bare, but the future depends on justice." The household gathered around as Poirot prepared to reveal the truth, his little gray cells having solved the mystery that had haunted Wren Hollow. Chapter 19. The unmasking. The drawing room at Wren Hollow watched with an electric tension as Poirot prepared to reveal the culmination of his investigation. The assembled household, Lord and Lady Wilton, Miss Boole James, the footman, and the other remaining staff, stood or sat, each with their own guarded expressions. Poirot's posture was impeccable, his shawls folded calmly before him, though his keen eyes flickered with the intensity of a man about to expose long-hidden truths. "Mazurius," he began, voice measured yet compelling. "For many weeks we have been unraveling a web of deceit woven over generations. I shall reveal the final truth behind the death of Harold Wilton." Paused to let the weight of his words settle. Harold's death was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated murder meant to silence him before he exposed the truth about his family's past, secrets so dark they have fed for decades. Shifted nervously among the listeners. Seraphina Markham was a woman cast out, erased from the family's history because of her scandalous pregnancy, yet she was loved by some and feared by others. The letters we found tell of forbidden love and bitter betrayal. Poirot's gaze locked on Lord Wilton. "You endeavored to protect the family name at any cost, but in doing so, you became a complicit in a terrible crime." Lord Wilton's jaw tightened. "But he saved nothing." Poirot turned to Miss Blythe and James. "Miss Blythe, you heard threats and saw the tension between Harold and those who wished him silenced, and James, your quarrel with Harold was more than mere frustration. It was fear." James swallowed hard. Poole continued, "But the true orchestrator of the murder was neither of you." He took a deep breath. "The person responsible is Lady Wilton." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Lady Wilton's eyes widened, but her voice was steady. Poirot, that is a grave accusation." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, but the evidence is clear. You feared the scandal and Theroine it would bring. When Harold threatened to reveal the truth, you saw no other way but to stop him. Permanently produced a small velvet pouch from his pocket. Inside are items taken from the crime scene and matched to Lady Wilton's belongings. A torn piece of her lace found near the orchard in letters. She'd attempted to destroy Lady Wilton, lowered her gaze. "It was to protect us all. I loved my family." Pugh's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Love does not justify murder, madame. Justice must prevail." The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Hastings stepped forward. "It's over now. The truth is out." Poirot nodded. "Yes, Hastings, but the scars left behind will remind us all that secrets buried too deeply can poison even the strongest of familiar chapter." 20. The rain that fell on only one grave year. Dickenmere. Dawn broke softly over Wren Hollow, pale light, spilling gently across the grounds, washing the manor in a quiet grace that belied the turmoil of the night before heavy clouds had passed, leaving behind skyster with soft hues of pink and gold. A fragile promise of renewal. Hercule Poirot stood quietly near the lone grave beneath the ash tree, his gaze fixed on the earth, still damp from the recent rain. The grass shimmered with early morning dew, but here the soil bore the deeper, tickle, unmistakable impression of yesterday's storm. Captain Hastings joined him, wrapping the coat tightly around his shoulders. "So it is finished," he said softly. "The truth has come out." "Yes," Poirot replied, his voice contemplative. Rain that fell on only one grave was a sign, a signal from the past that demanded attention. It called forth secrets long buried, and in doing so, it brought justice. He turned to Hastings. "This house has seen much sorrow, but it has also shown the resilience of the human spirit, the courage to face truths and to heal. The gates of Wren Hollow opened slowly as Lady Wilton and Lord Wilton emerged, their expressions weary but unburdened. The weight of secrets had been lifted, though the path ahead would require healing and forgiveness. Poirot watched them with a faint smile. "It is not merely the mystery that fascinates me, Hastings, but the hearts involved. Each person carries shadows, yet also light." As the morning sun rose higher, casting long beams through the ancient trees, the manor seemed to breathe again, releasing a long-held breath. "Let us hope," Poirot said, "that the rain that fell on only one grave also waters the seeds of a new beginning." Hastings nodded, and that Wren Hollow may find peace at last. Together they walked away from the grave, their footsteps soft upon the earth, the quiet promise of a clearer dawn ahead.